talking about how I made this piece here, which is still a work in progress, but it's for my portfolio, and I kind of wanted to go over the process and how to digitally render skin in a way that's quick and easy. For people who are kind of new to it and need something step-by-step that doesn't take forever. So I started off by using the shale brush, which is just one of the regular sketching brushes that comes with Procreate. And for a lot of the smudging I'm doing, I'm using either the soft airbrush, which is in the airbrushing section, another default brush. And then for a couple things with the hair, I'm using what's called that round brush, which I wish I could remember the creator. I found it on TikTok and it looked awesome, so I downloaded it. And unfortunately, I can't find them. So I can't give you that brush or tell you where to find it, but I did take a screenshot of all of the different settings that it is, and I'm pretty sure looking at the shape, it's a variation on the syrup brush. So you could start with that if you want to make your own version of this. And again, I'm just using it for the hair, and then when I get to the background, I'll use it for a little bit of that. But most of the stuff I'm using is default. The only thing that I did use that I paid for was the Freya Wet on Wet 6, or maybe it's Dry on Wet, watercolor texture brush. And that's from a Freya watercolor pack that I purchased. But really it's just like a repeating texture brush. And if you want to figure out how to make your own repeating texture brush, let me know. I can make a video on it. But here's my general process. So one thing that I think is really important to know when you're working on a piece is that it's important to use reference, and pretty much every artist is going to be using some sort of reference, even if they alter it. So my reference is altered quite a bit to what it is now. I ended up taking this image, which I found off of Pinterest, and then I also took this image, which I also found on Pinterest, and I kind of mashed them together. The girl on the bottom on here is, kind of where I took my reference from, but I changed her nose, I changed a lot of the way she looks, I changed the hair for both of them, and then I kind of made it my own. And then I wanted two hands to be in there. So for the first hand and the second hand, I took my own reference. So these are my horrible photos of me showing my hand to my camera, flipping things over, and then just drawing what I saw and kind of streamlining it. I wanted it to feel very elegant, very smooth. So I changed my own reference too. And I put everything together, and that's how I got this drawing. And then we moved on to rendering. And I always start with a mid-tone gray base, because if you're painting something that's really light, and you have a white background, it's always going to look a little too dark, because in life, things are never against a bright white background unless you're in a studio or whatever with really specific lighting. And you don't want it to be too dark. If you work against a black background, your lights are gonna look way too light, and you end up keying everything really, really dark. So if you want a painting that leans very, very light, you can have a lighter background. If you want a painting that leans dark, you can have a darker background. Generally, if you want it to feel kind of normal, you want to have a mid-tone background. I ended up going a little bit darker later, which you'll see. But those are multiply layers and lighting things that you can always add on later on. So starting with the mid-tone background, I highlight, select, just with the freehand draw tool selection in Procreate, the entire area of skin that I want to render. And I put down a base mid-tone color for the flesh. And then I'm going to render on top of that. And everything I do above this layer is done with a clipping mask. If you're not sure what a clipping mask is, what you do is you go to your layer, and I'm just gonna create a new layer. And right now these two layers are on top of each other. But I'm going to tap on this layer, and you can see over here where it says clipping mask, I'm just going to tap on that, and you can see a little arrow comes down. And now whatever I draw on here is only going to be on top or in this layer here. If I go down, you can see almost everything I've done is on a clipping mask. And that way I can be have a really big brush, be very swishy and flowy. And I don't have to worry about this going outside of the lines of the base. And then if I turn the base off, you can see everything about the skin turns off. So as I start off rendering, I'm starting with the skin base, and then I'm taking the soft airbrush from the airbrushing section. And I'm just airbrushing in where all of the soft shadows are going to be. So usually under your cheekbone, unless you have a really full round face, like babies or people who are especially overweight may have heavier faces where the skin kind of bulges out here, but usually it's gonna push in here, the edge of the nose here. You can see there's a light part on the top of my nose, and then here the nose gets darker. Now, if you have a flatter nose, this is not going to be as wide of a shadow area. Same with the brows. Underneath the brow line, notice that my skin is a lot darker here. Part of it is eyeshadow, but I promise it's naturally darker too. If you want people who have a more like European build with like a heavier brow ridge, that area can get darker. If they have a flatter brow, then it can get a little bit lighter. You also will have a shadow under your nose and then on the neck here. And you have pretty distinct shadows in your ears. So when I go through it, I'm making my brush fairly small, and it's still a soft brush, but I'm having a harder line around the ears and directly under the jaw where I want there to be a sharper line. But then everything else is going to be a lot softer, and my brush gets wider the softer the shadow is. So under the chin, it's very soft. Under the jawline, it's very soft, and under the cheekbone. And you can see here, there are two lines that have shadows in them. This is called your sternocleidomastoid. It's a muscle, and if you flex your neck, you can see it better. And your throat lies in between it. So between your sternocleidomastoid and your throat, you're gonna have this triangle of shadow. And you're also going to have a triangle of shadow here underneath your jawline where your face is casting a shadow. Color-wise, pick something that is darker than your skin tone, but you also wanna go more saturated. So the darker something is, the more saturated it is. The lighter something is, the more desaturated it is. Generally, you can kind of go in a little bit of an arc. So there's this midway point where it's a little more saturated, and then it starts getting a little less saturated as it between shadows and light, a little bit more saturated. And it adds this sort of soft, like warm glow to everything. And I'm actually taking another layer of, I think I did soft light, where I lay in like some extra shadows that are warm here. And I just use like a slightly darker, slightly more saturated layer, but with soft light, it's gonna lighten everything up. And because soft light isn't an opaque layer, it's going to show on top and under everything else. Now that I have kind of the basic shadows put in, I want to add color to the face. So we're going to turn on a soft light layer with a clipping mask, and we're going to do what's called the color zones of the face. Now, generally speaking, the color zones of the face are gonna lean a little more like yellow ochre on the forehead and this area over here. Across the cheeks, the ears, and the nose, and also on the lips, you're going to get the red color zone of the face. And then down here, like below the shadow of the cheekbones, a little bit on the chin, and also a little bit under the eyes, you're gonna get a cooler tone. On men, you can go blue, but with women, I tend to go a little bit more olive, because if you go too blue, it looks a little more like a 5 o'clock shadow, and you want to avoid that. So I went a little bit more of like a purple with this girl, and I think there are a couple notes of green, but I wanted like a very like warm yellow orange versus blue purple color scheme in general here. I leaned a little more cool, but because it's soft light, it's not too intense, and I still use a soft brush to block this in, and I am not using full opacity. I'm using a very, very light touch here, so I can go darker in places where I need to. And places where you have more areas of shadow, you can actually go a little bit darker because you can get more colorful in areas of shadow, but in the light areas, you want to keep it more or less like overall, like very faint. I like to paint in my lights last because light can have color to it. And in this case, I want this character's third eye to be kind of glowing like a cyan blue. And I want to lay in the rest of the color for everything before I put the light on top of it. So I'm starting around the light source, and I'm making sure the forehead is lit, the bridge of the nose, like anywhere that would hit that area of light. And there are a couple websites where you can alter lighting on a 3D model just to see like what the lighting is going to look like. There are a couple apps. I'll put some suggestions in the description, and there's also Pose Maniacs, which is a free site where you can look at like 3D models of people and then adjust the lighting so it hits them from different angles. And I find that's really helpful if you're not really sure how the lighting works. But yeah, I did a color dodge layer and a color layer. A color layer only affects the color of the piece. It doesn't adjust the value at all. So the value, like the lightness versus darkness, stays exactly the same, but I wanted more color than color dodge was giving me because it's an additive layer, meaning that it adds light to something, and because the characters are already very pale, I wasn't getting a lot of color. So the color layer goes a little bit around the light. Usually the closer to the center of the light, the whiter you want the light to be, if you want the light to look intense. And then color dodge for the rest of it, just laying it on really, really lightly with a soft brush. And then I took one layer on top of it that did not have a clipping mask on it. So the light looked like it was spilling outside of her face and not just contained to her skin. But everything else is on a clipping mask. Anyway, that's how I did the face, and that's all the rendering for the skin. It's fairly easy, but I want to show you a screenshot of all of my layers here if you want to take a look at it, practice it at home, kind of see how things are divided down, the layer modes that they're on, etc. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Comment with any questions or tutorial suggestions, or visit mingcreativeart.com to check out our classes and our community Discord. And I will see you in the next video. I will be back to explain how to render the hair in the shirt.